So over the past week, I have been resetting pretty much every aspect of my life in preparation for the new year, but when it came to doing my mental spaces, this is the one that I didn't really have a plan for. So rather than sorting out the plan and then filming the bits and pieces that go into it, I figured we'd go through together in how to kind of plan your own mental reset. Part of it will be me doing the steps myself, and then part of it will be a little bit more instructional, but grab yourself a paper and a pen and let's get into it. In my mind, the mental reset has 3 main stages. So 1, figuring out the purpose or the priorities from doing the mental reset. 2, being figuring out how to achieve those priorities that you set for yourself in 1. And then 3, being actually doing them. So here, starting with priorities, I'm figuring out what do I actually want the reset to do for me? What kind of feelings do I want it to bring about? Are there any areas in particular that I want to focus on? All of that kind of stuff. I'm just jotting that down in a simple bulleted list, and I'm putting it up here at the front so I can refer back to it when it comes to our second stage. As part of this list writing, I don't try and hold myself back to only things that are kind of viable or reasonable for this reset in particular. I'm effectively rewarding myself for having any thought by writing it down on the list. You may choose to do this in something that isn't your bullet journal. I know I get a little bit precious about what I do or don't put into my bullet journal, but because I have some extra space in this notebook, I'm not too fussed with writing out things that aren't necessarily reasonable for the reset process itself. I do try to make sure that all of these are related to at least mental wellness, mental health, my mental space, so that then when I go through them after this step, I at least know I'm looking at the right kind of stuff. So the things that I wrote down is that I want clarity on what needs to get done. I need to be at peace with how things went this year, so possibly like some reflection kind of stuff. Excited about things coming up next year. I want to be clear on what I can do for my mental health, know what I want for my mental wellness, unstressed, not overwhelmed, not burnt out, and calm moving into the new year. Now from that list you can see that some of these are going to be long-term projects, not just part of this mental reset that we're doing here, but at least this is all the kind of vibe that I'm trying to create through my mental reset process. Now as we have the priorities though, we can start to think about what can we actually do to achieve these things? What kind of aspects can we have or steps can we take as part of the resetting process to achieve this? That list of action steps I'm just writing out next to the priorities so that I can tick them off as we work through. I kind of like having them in a column right next to the priorities because then in theory you could pick one action step for each priority. It doesn't have to work out this way, especially if a lot of your priorities are kind of related to each other, but that is one way that you could tackle it. On my list though, I have put down a brain dump or a mind unwind, whichever term you like to use, making a list of things that are unfinished and that I possibly need to finish, and when I'm going to finish them. A list of things that I want to do before 2024, so slightly different from the last list because some of these may not have actually been started yet. Then we have a keep, start, stop list, and thinking about the stuff related to mental health, mental wellness, mental patterns in particular. We also have reflection and goal setting. That's going to be done separate to this video, but it is something that I'm going to do in particular for my kind of mental space. And I also want to make myself a mental health research list because I just feel like I don't have the best understanding of how to help myself mentally a lot of the time. Like in these more intentional kind of sessions, like the mental reset, I'm pretty okay. But when it comes to the day-to-day stuff, I don't necessarily have the best tactics for that. So maybe a list of things that I might want to check out further to help myself out. If you have any recommendations, put them in the comments below. But the last one here is a life admin day plan. So effectively a day to wrap up some of those before 2024 tasks and thinking which ones I can pack together on one day in particular to get as much done as possible. As we said, step 3 is actually doing those things. So I'm going to start my brain dump here. For this step, I'm really just thinking about anything that's on my mind and jotting it down onto the page. Yes, a lot of these are going to be tasks or things that need to get done, but there could also just be other thoughts and musings in there as well. Again, if I have the thought, I'm just writing it down on the page to kind of reward myself for having the thought. And because I get that little dopamine kick of getting to write something down, it means my brain's more likely to generate more ideas for this list. What can be really useful in this step is setting yourself a timer so that you don't just sit here for like half an hour or maybe more, just constantly writing things down. I decided to keep mine to roughly 10 minutes to make it manageable, but you can go with slightly shorter or slightly longer, really whatever works for you. What can also be useful in this stage is using something like a trigger list, which is effectively a list of prompts that you can read over to try and bring ideas to the front of your mind while you do your brain dump. I've got one of those in my long-term collections journal, and we also have a separate live stream video where we set that one up. Another way to go about it is limiting the amount of space you have. So I have 3 columns here, but only this much of a page. So I could just limit myself to this, or I could let it flow over, but in the interest of getting all of these things done, that's where I'm going to leave mine. We're not going to read through those. I mean, you can pause and have a snoop if you want. That is totally fine. There is no shame in that. But our next one is my unfinished / to finish list. Now, the way that I'm going to do this one is writing it out in a column on that page on the right hand side. But rather than thinking about which ones I want to finish specifically this year as I go through, I'm just going to write down all of the unfinished projects and then go in and color code them based on when I want them to get done. This list isn't going to be quite as long as the brain dump, and it will have some overlap with it, but I'm specifically thinking about things that I've already started here and they're not quite finished. That could be that they're very close to being finished and not quite done, or they could have just been started and they're going to need quite a bit longer. As said, not all of these are going to get finished this year. It's just kind of nice to have them off my mind. Oftentimes unfinished tasks and unfinished projects kind of play in a loop in our mind, and getting them out of my head and onto the paper is just going to help me with this whole resetting process. Plus, with having them down on the paper in black and white, I can see what still needs to be done and start prioritizing which ones I might want to work on. It's also good to note that some of the things that I'm writing on this unfinished list also didn't appear in the brain dump. I find that a lot of the time when it comes to these kind of mind unwind or brain dump kind of processes, asking questions in different ways will lead to different answers. So if you want to do a really thorough job of any kind of brain dump, it's good to ask yourself a variety of questions to get those things out of your head. So for instance, in the brain dump stage, it's just what's on your mind. In this one, it's very much what is unfinished, or what do you still need to do. Other types of questions you could ask yourself could be things like, what's bothering me? What am I annoyed about? What do I have to do in the kitchen, living room, bedroom, wherever else? What haven't I done in a while? Is there anybody I need to check in with, or any event coming up that I need to do something for? Just by reframing how you're focusing on the problem can lead to different things on your list. So this is the list of stuff that I have to do that's unfinished, and as said, not all of these are going to happen this year. What I now want to do is go through this list and kind of color code it to say, this stuff will get done this year, these things will leave, yada yada yada. So one of these will be, yes, definitely doing it this year. We'll then have one for would be nice to do this year, and another one for just leaving it till 2024. For this step, I'm just going to use some Zig Clean Color dot markers, so this kind of like pinkish color for the ones that I'm going to do. And then this kind of cross between a purple and a pink for the would be nice to do, and then a true purple for leaving it until next year. I went over that dot again, but it was not a good idea. Effectively, I'm just going through each of the list items and considering them one by one, so rather than going through and trying to pick out all of the ones to do this year first, I figured it would be easier to just take the very systematic approach of working from top to bottom. While I'm doing this, I'm also trying to think about how much time I actually have in the rest of this year. There's no point in overloading myself with way too many projects, because then they just won't get done and get to the end of the year feeling not accomplished, whereas I would rather pick less things and be more intentional about my choices, so that then I can get to the end of the year feeling good about completing those in particular. The good part about having the nice to-do list rather than the to-do list is that if you do finish those other things, you can get started on them, but you've gone in with the intention of them not actually being part of the list, if that kind of makes sense. The ones in particular that I've picked out as kind of want to do them before the end of the year are my 2023 budget, so kind of rounding that out at least as much as I can before the very last day of the year, doing my computer upgrades because my computer is suffering, finishing off my planning system overhaul because I want to hit the ground running in 2024. Similarly, we have my goal planning for the new year, and we also have Vlogmas. But that is the unfinished projects list, so we can tick that one off. And then the next thing we're doing is the before 2024 list. So this doesn't necessarily have to be projects that I've started and they're not quite finished, but effectively any other thing that I can think of that needs to be done before the end of the year. Again, there might be some overlap with the brain dump, so I'm going to try and not write down duplicates because I've already recorded those, but it's just another way of reframing that question so I can be very thorough in my mental resetting. This is another one where setting a timer could be really useful, just to make sure that you don't spend kind of too long on that task. But here in particular, I'm trying to think about any events we have coming up, either at the end of this year or at the very start of next year, any releases that need to come out and thus things that I need to do for those, and any other little bits and pieces that might have been missed from the last 2 questions. For my one, I decided to give myself until the end of the page, just knowing that I had that little bit of space in the brain dump section if I thought of anything else as I go through. Sometimes it just helps to give ourselves restraints so that we can be a little bit more intentional with our time. But that is our before 2024 list done, so we can tick that one off. Our next task is to do a keep, start, stop list. Or usually I like to do keep, stop, start. So it's the things to keep on doing, the things to stop doing, and then the things to start or kind of like try doing. And for all of these, I'm thinking about them in terms of my mental patterns. So what kind of typical mental patterns or mental routines do I have that are helping me? Those are the ones I want to keep doing. Hindering me or becoming kind of detrimental to my wellness, we're going to stop doing those, or at least attempt to. And then for any that I think might be useful, those are the ones that I might want to start or try doing in the new year. Those ones I'm putting in the next column over, and rather than sectioning out a distinct place for the keep, the stop, and the start, I just decided to go with the keep first, write out all of those ideas, then write in the stop ones, then write in the start ones, mainly so that I could make full use of the page. What I would typically prefer to do though is have a sectioned out space for each of the different things, so that then I can just write them down in the relevant place as the thoughts come up. And this is why, again, I kind of recommend if you're gonna do this, do it in something that you don't mind being a little bit messy with. I'm just using my bullet journal because I have extra space in there, but notably I am still a little bit precious about how things look. Another way of doing this is something similar to an Alistair method, but rather than like days of the week or something like that, you have a column for keep, a column for stop, and a column for start. Then you can just write out all of the things in list form and put a dot in the relevant column. Again, you can pause and have a snoop at the list if you really want to, but we've got a good chunk of keeping, stopping, and starting things. So these ones in particular are things that I might want to set goals around or might want to kind of set habit intentions for the new year. But now as they are in, we can tick those off. And talking about goals, the next task here is for doing reflection of the year gone, or for me, the quarter gone, and goal setting for the next year or the next quarter. We're going to have some separate videos on goal setting in particular, but the goals journal has already been set up. That one's linked in the description box and in the cards, yada yada. So we'll leave that one for now, but the next thing to look into is a mental health research list. This one I started off by doing just a little bit of research online for things that I might be interested in, as well as just jotting down a couple of ideas that I already had. As I mentioned before, if you have any good resources, whether they be like websites, blogs, YouTube channels, whatever else that you enjoy consuming with stuff related to mental health and learning about mental health and wellness habits, I would love to hear about them. Please do drop any recommendations in the comments below, but on my list I've put burnout, stress management, meditation, the watcher in my mind, mindful eating, self-compassion, and evening routines. This isn't an exhaustive list, there's probably other stuff that I also want to research and look into, but as a starting point, not too bad. Now the next part was setting up a life admin day that I do a bunch of different things that'll just get me kind of cool, calm, and collected for the year ahead. So picking some tasks off of the lists that I've got here, also possibly having a look at my future me problems list for anything that I might have forgotten. And we're gonna put that list here. It's not gonna be a day plan in the sense of like, this, then this, then this, but more so a collection of things that I know I can get done all on the same day. That last part is particularly important. There's no use in picking a bunch of tasks if realistically you can't do them on the same day, or if they kind of conflict with each other. For instance, if the majority of your tasks on this life admin day plan are done at home, then that's probably all good, but as soon as you start putting in other locations, you have to consider whether you can actually get to them all. If a bunch of tasks all require you to go to the same place, then that's totally fine, but the other thing is to be mindful of how much time each of those things are going to take, especially if, like me, you have a bit of time blindness and you don't necessarily predict how much time things are going to take very accurately. Then make sure you're building that buffer into the plan as you go. You don't want to chuck a bunch of things on this list that end up taking you much longer than you initially anticipated, because then you'll end up making less progress on your list than you otherwise could have. I know for me, if I pick a bunch of small wins to put on my list, then the list looks long, but it can be achieved much easier easier. That opportunity to quickly tick off a bunch of things on the list effectively builds momentum and gets me hyped for doing more of the items. I've opted to have the majority of my tasks be ones that are actually around the home or digitally, because if I do all of the computer ones together and then all of the ones that are around the house together, it shouldn't take me all too long. The ones that I foresee taking a while are the 2023 budget population, because I've been putting it off, and the then logging expenses in Henry, HNRY. That's my kind of, I don't know, service that I use for tax, because I can't do my own taxes because we all made it too bloody hard. Sad face. Anyway, I figure that before the day actually arrives that I do this, I'll review the list and see if there's anything else that's come up, but I'm feeling pretty good about this. If we think about it in terms of what my priorities were, I do certainly have a better idea of the things that need to get done. Once I finish my reflection and goal setting for next year, I will be quite pumped to get into 2024. And again, I know that some of those priorities are long-term things, but I think that with the things I've decided to keep, stop, and start, and the areas that I want to research, all of those are certainly possible. This is of course only one of the spaces that I've been resetting in preparation for next year, so if you wanted to see the rest of my resetting content, then the playlist at the top is where it's at. That includes resetting my physical and digital spaces, and if you want to get that cool, calm, collected feeling for the new year, then it's worth a watch. Click or tap on that one, and I'll see you over there.